How's that? Okay, much better. So welcome everyone to the Research to Practice webinar from the Research Center for Children and Families. Our theme is reflective practice evidence on family time. And it's our pleasure to share with you some of the emerging findings and experiences of our Fostering Lifelong Connections research study. I'd like to, if you go to the next slide, please, Dr. Betty Liu. This is a team effort that I'd like to acknowledge. So we're working with a terrific set of partner organizations and a research team. And the purpose of this project, as I'll talk more about, is about developing positive sort of relationship building practices between caseworkers to support the relationship between children's birth families and their permanent care families when they're in long-term care. So we're going to be giving you an overview of the presentation in a moment. I just wanted to mention that this is a real team effort with our partner organizations, New South Wales Department of Communities and Justice, Bernardos Australia, Catholic Care Hunter Maitland, Catholic Care Wollongong, Key Assets Uniting, and Wesley Dalmar. And we have a research team, some of whom you will meet today, including Dr. Lynette Riley and Dr. Susan Collings, and our research center staff as well. And you'll get to meet Sarah Chifty today as well. And also members of our expert reference group, members of our expert by experience and expert by profession group. So you'll hear more about the project as we go along. But now I would like to hand over to my wonderful colleague, Dr. Lynette Riley, who is also the subject of an Archibald portrait this year. So we're taking this opportunity to share this very powerful portrait that was painted by Charlotte Lund. And we always like to encourage people to make use of the kinship modules that Dr. Riley has prepared, which are available for free at this website. A terrific resource for carers who'd like to learn about children's culture, a terrific resource for caseworkers and for children. And I'd like to now hand it over to Lynn to give our acknowledgement of country. Thank you.
Yama, Marang Nungari, Mang Lagar Wiradjuri, Mang Dinawin Gamilaroi. I'd like to pay homage and respect to my elders and countrymen of the Wiradjuri and Gamilaroi nations. And in doing so, I also would like to pay respect to the people upon whose land I'm sitting on today, which is the people of the Eora Nation. And I encourage each of you in the chat to acknowledge the nations and peoples of the country where you sit today, because we're all coming from right across New South Wales. Thank you very much for having us work with you today. And I'm very proud of the portrait. It's the first portrait I've ever had done. And it's the first time that Charlotte, who did the portrait, has done a portrait of this significance. So it's very exciting. And there's a little story about the portrait that was put on NITV yesterday. So if you get a chance, have a look at that as well. So Yama, everyone, welcome. And we're really excited about being with you here with you today.
Thank you so much, Lynn. It's such a pleasure to work with Lynn and all of our team. And I also would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which the University of Sydney is built, the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And for the webinar overview now, you're going to get to hear from different members of our team, some of the people whose names I've already mentioned. So this is a three-part webinar, and then we have a piece at the end for question and answer with our panel. So feel free to put questions to any of the people who present. You'll notice that there's a Q&A function, so that's where you can direct your questions, and we'll come to those at the end. So the first part is an introduction to this project and an overview of the project. I'll start by sharing about the project and then hand over to Bernadette Wood, who is the Director for Practice and Permanency with the Office of the Senior Practitioner in the Department of Communities and Justice, New South Wales. So she can talk about how this project relates to other initiatives as well as to the practice framework in New South Wales. Then we will talk about sector collaboration and privileging lived experience. So Dr. Susan Collings will share about our expert reference panel and how we're working with them. And Bobby Hendry, who is a member of our expert reference panel as an expert by experience, will share about her views and her experiences of family time as a young person who has a care experience. Then we'll hand over to a discussion about the practice trials, and you'll see what we mean about practice trials as we go along, about how we're trialing different types of practices in relation to family time, and gathering evidence at this stage in the project primarily through reflection, group reflection. And we'll hear from Sarah Chifty, who's our research associate, and also from Blythe Quick, who's a caseworker with Catholic Care, Hunter Manning, and one of our action researchers. And at the end, if you have any questions, again, please put those to us through the question and answer function. So moving to the next slide and advancing to that slide. Just a little bit about the context and aims of this project. And again, as more participants join the call, many of you we know from registrations are in New South Wales. And so this will be something that you're well aware of, that in New South Wales and in the Australian context in general, there's an expectation that children will continue to have what have been face-to-face visits, but have continued visitation and relationships with their birth families when they are on permanent orders. And that holds for children in kinship care, if they're on a guardianship arrangement, if they are in open adoption, or if they're in long-term foster care. So our project is looking at the practices that go across all those different forms of legal permanency. And for Aboriginal children and families, where the majority of children are in kinship care and the Aboriginal Child Placement Principle prioritizes kinship care, we're looking at the complex kinship interrelationships and obligations among extended family and communities, and how caseworkers can take those into account in terms of the relationship building practices that they are coordinating. And so what we're doing as sort of the overall project aim for this project, which is funded by the Australian Research Council as well as by our partner organizations, is to develop new relationship-based practices and also trial ones that may not have been used widely already at this stage in New South Wales, test them out with our group of action researchers who are all caseworkers and caseworker managers with our partner organizations. And ultimately, after testing them and evaluating them, working towards a process of embedding them within those organizations, and then also disseminating them to the wider out-of-home care sector in New South Wales and nationally and even internationally, to have a wider skill set available of relationship building practices to encourage those positive relationships between children's birth relatives and their permanent care families. Again, permanent care families encompassing children in kinship care, guardianship, open adoption, and long-term foster care. So advancing to the next slide. We're only going to be able to give you sort of a snippet of the project as part of this webinar, but we have a lot of information about the project if you're curious on our website for our research center. So if you go to the Research Center for Children and Families, you'll see that under our projects, there's a section about fostering lifelong connections for children in permanent care. And we have a dedicated project website, which includes many more resources. And also on our main website, we have some tip sheets that we've been preparing, and which Sarah will speak more to, that have been developed in the context of the practice trials that we've been doing, that have been identified by caseworkers as being useful. So for example, things like some tips about how you can engage with children using virtual visitation by video contact, some conversation starters, and also some brief research to practice notes that relate to the context of this project, such as the research that's already been done on virtual visitation for families. So I just direct you to that website for more information. And advancing to the next slide. So now a little bit about the project. And again, we'll go into, this is sort of the big picture, and then we'll go into some examples as we move along in the presentation. The methodology that we're using is one that has been used widely in child protection and child welfare, as it's called, in the United States, but had not previously been utilized in Australia. And it's called a Breakthrough Series Collaborative. So if you're interested in this methodology, the Casey Family Programs website has a lot more information about it. it's a methodology that was first developed out of health research, where, you know, it's often sort of to get evidence into practice can often take a long time. It can take randomized control trials, and, you know, the sort of the length of time of that, you know, can be somewhat frustrating, when sometimes what you want to really do is sort of tweak and experiment and sort of generate things in the local context. And this this methodology is really about doing small trials of practice change and studying those practice changes to generate evidence that way. So it's very much something that comes from the grassroots up, in terms of people who are locally involved in practice at the front lines, identifying what the needs are, and working together as a team with other practitioners and with researchers to identify what is the practice and trial that practice, plan a practice test. And we'll talk about the practices we are testing, which have to do with children's contact via video conferencing, and also some debriefing with children's birth relatives and children and birth parents. So trial the practice on a small scale. So we're doing this in a small scale because we've got 22 caseworkers plus their casework managers in different locations where there are different practice needs. And then we're setting time aside to reflect on the data that we're collecting. And the data that we're sharing in this is really about generating evidence from reflection. So how does it work with different families? What happens when you try this practice? What needs to be changed next time? And then tweaking it, and sort of having this continual cycle where you're continuing to try the practice, you know, plan it out, doing it, studying it, and continuing to refine it to sort of figure out what seems to work, and then learning from these experiments to generate evidence. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see how one cycle like this, and we do this over about a 6-month period with different local teams, and we have 4 local teams in the Maitland, Newcastle area, in the Wollongong area, Sydney area, and in Dubbo, are trialing you know, a particular practice in their local areas, and then having opportunities to come together as a larger group to share what we're learning and to sort of, you know, find out what was working well in Maitland, and maybe next time Newcastle would like to, or sorry, excuse me, next time Wollongong might like to trial that one, or, you know, learning different sort of things that can be kind of adapted to practice in these different settings. So we started this project this year in February, of course, just before sort of COVID hit. And so then during this Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle, which goes to October, some of our practice trials, as you hear, were affected by this sort of new environment in which we find ourselves. And so we've been able to also be quite responsive to what practice changes people are already doing, and learning from those practice changes so that we can sort of see what works, what are the challenges, what guidance can be provided to make children's kind of time and visits with their family as positive as possible, and the relationships positive between children's families. We'll continue to sort of meet at sort of 6-month intervals as a group, and each time for each of these Plan, Do, and Study, Act cycles, the local teams will identify the practice they would like to trial, and our team will work with them to collect data through reflections, and also starting in the next cycle from directly talking to children and to families about their experiences of the practice trials, to ultimately move toward identifying the practices that seem worth keeping as part of a sort of a toolbox of practice, and then working with our partner organizations to scale up their use within their organizations, and also developing resources for the sector, which we're really already beginning to do with our website. So now I'm going to hand it over to Bernadette Wood, who can speak to how these practices in our project relate to the work that's going on in the Office of the Senior Practitioner.
Hi, thanks, Amy. Hello, everybody. I'm sure that a lot of you will have seen the practice framework. So this is the sort of representation of a whole lot of work. That is the way that the department is working with families, and now training our staff to work with families. So I'm just going to give you a quick little bird's eye view. If we start in the middle, you can see we've got the little brown boxes. So they are the 5 key skills that caseworkers have to have. So you've got to be able to assess, you've got to be able to build lifelong connections for children, you've got to be able to influence change, you've got to be able to work with family and with their culture, and you've got to be able to develop purposeful partnerships. So when we talk about family time, you can see that it pops into a few of those core areas. Obviously building lifelong connections, obviously working with family, and a purposeful partnership with both family and the foster carer or the adoptive parent. So that's the sort of key target areas that we now say are the essential parts of a caseworker's role. The blue blocks around that is just the informed approaches that we as a department choose to use. You could use many evidence-informed approaches, but they happen to be ours. The green circle is the principles upon which all our practice is built, and is the most important part of the framework. And there are 5 principles. The first one is culture, that culture is everywhere. You must work with culture and acknowledge culture. The second one is that language is important, and you must use the correct, respectful, warm, relationship building type language. We say to our staff, you should not speak about any staff member or family or child in a way that you wouldn't be prepared to speak about them in front of them. That language forms language forms our thinking, and we know there's lots of research about that. If you speak negatively, how do you engage with someone? If you've had a negative conversation in the office before you're going out to see them, clearly your engagement is impacted. The third principle is that relationships bring about change. Nothing else brings about change, it's relationships. So our job is to build relationships with families so that we can bring about the change that's needed. Can't emphasize that enough. The fourth principle is critique, which is where we bring in the whole part of reflective practice, which is what links very much to this research project. You know, if we say, if you are still doing your assessments the way you were doing them 6 or 7 years ago, then that's something's very, very wrong, because research is changing. Nobody knows everything. The only way that you can improve your work is to stop, think and reflect and receive feedback on it. And so we have a principle of critique in there that says that critique leads to better practice, and that we should all be, you know, open to critique at all times. The last principle is obvious, the obvious one, which is that ethics guides our work, and it is the heart of our work. The little orange circle around that is all the systems and processes that we have, and I'm going to chat about one of those for a second, and that is group supervision. So every caseworker attends group supervision for 3 hours every week, and every week that little team has 1 or 2 families that they might bring in, and it might be an issue about should they come into care or not. It might be an issue about is our family time regime suitable, whatever the issue might be. But it is a time where the team stops, reflects, where we actively focus on the principle of critique, and where we actively talk about the importance of multiple perspectives, that no family is one view, none of us are one view. There are many strands that make up our life, many strands that make up a family, and we encourage alternate views to come to the table. So if people are, you know, heading down a path, we often ask other people to play devil's advocate, to think what might be different. Is there a different explanation for that? So again, building in that reflective practice. And the last bit, as you can see, is culture. And we firmly believe that culture wraps around everything, and that culture is so important to the way that we work. And that is, of course, about the culture that we're born in. It's also the culture that we're raised in, and it's also the culture that we work in. You know, our teams have cultures, our offices have cultures. So it's very much about being aware of culture and taking it along. So fundamentally, I would say that the department is working and moving very strongly towards a model of practice that is relationship-based first and foremost, that is driven by ethics, by critique, and by reflection, which is why we're so happy to be involved in this project, which is living that out every way. The other thing I'm sure that you all know, can I have the next slide please, is that when you come to the department, we have a caseworker development program, which is a 14-week supported program of learning, some online, some face-to-face, some tasks to be done. And so it's brand new. We're only halfway through the first cohort. So the whole program, which has been around for a gazillion years, has been rewritten Every single word has been rewritten and thought about from the beginning to the end. So what they've given me is 8 little messages that are the key messages that new caseworkers are getting about family time. And I thought you'd might to see those. I'll whiz through them quickly. But I remember, you know, many years ago, the key message about family time was it's supervised, it's 4 times a year, and it's for identity purposes only. And those of you that have worked around a long time will have seen court documents where that's what's written. The purpose is for identity. Like, there was nothing, it's not about relationship and lifelong connections. And now, of course, we say very much that a permanent order goes to 18. I don't know about any of you, but if you're as old as I am, 18-year-olds are not fully formed people who go out into the world without ongoing need for family support. We all need family support all the way through our lives. And the idea that we can cut a family off from a child is just, you know, not helpful and extremely harmful. So these are the messages that we are currently teaching our new caseworkers, even as we speak. That family time is critical to supporting children's connection, sense of belonging, and of course, successful restoration. If we're not doing good family time, we're not going to be able to do that. That it should be inclusive of a wide range of people. So it's not just for parents. It is for siblings, grandparents, aunts, uncles. That caseworkers should speak with children, parents and carers to prepare for and follow up from family time. It's not I book a card to pick the kid up and that's it. That we need to provide support and feedback to make the visits together meaningful and enjoyable. That the preparation of family time has to look at the needs of the family, and it's not a one-size-fits-all model. People have different accessibility needs, etc. Next. Children deserve family time in an enjoyable, relaxed environment. That's not usually locked inside an office in our department. Caseworkers should work with children and families to create meaningful visits for them in places that are fun but feel safe. If it needs supervision, and it's not a guarantee it needs supervision, but if family time needs supervision, we should really think about who's the best person, and really, ideally, a member of the child's family. The idea, you know, 13 or 14 years ago, it was common to have perfect strangers pick children up from homes, from carers, to take them to family, which is a anxiety-producing, stressful thing. They may love them and love them when they get there, but the whole trip there and the trip back and all happened in the back of a stranger's car because that was the supervised contact worker. So we're trying to move past that to be really thinking about who is in fact going to be the best person to supervise contact for the child. That not only are we using family time to assess a family, we should be using it to model responsive care. It's actually a great time for teaching parenting skills as well. And that caseworker should follow up with strength-based feedback for the parents so that they can make the most of each and every time they get to spend with their children. So I've just popped those in really just to show you the key messages that are going through our training that are different from what we've certainly heard in the past, but most important, as I said, very much a relationship-based, reflective model of practice is what we're attempting to get out there everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bernadette. And that's very much in line with our project, as you'll hear more about in the next sort of aspects of the presentation. And we already have a question that we'll come back to, Bernadette, about caseworker training. So we'll come back to questions, but feel free to put those in the Q&A as we go along. So now I'd like to hand over to Dr. Susan Collings and to Bobby Hendry, who will speak about our collaboration with the sector and how we're privileging lived experience. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Amy. And as Amy's outlined, collaboration, you can already see, is absolutely key to this project. Collaboration across lots of levels. So the methodology we've chosen is not only co-design, so it's sort of grounded in those principles of learning from people who have the knowledge based on their experience. It's actually learning from a whole range of people. And so Amy sort of outlined the different layers of this, and what I want to do just really briefly is talk about how we've involved the sector and how we've involved people who are on the receiving end of these practices and rules around the shape that family time takes. and obviously really sort of giving primacy to those voices. But the two groups that we, we can see that, the FLC project, the Fostering Lifelong Connections project, is about learning from lots of different experts who understand the problems from a really deep understanding of contact or family time, and the other thing about co-design is getting buy-in from people. So if we're going to be proposing that some of these new practices that we're trialling are workable, well, then we really need to hear that from a lot of different perspectives and test them with a lot of different, and have feedback from a lot of different voices, if you like, because buy-in is the key to successful change and lasting change. Thanks, Betty. So yes, so if you just back one slide. Yep, so we've got these, I just want to introduce them by name. The research team members Amy has introduced, but the experts by experience, Bobby, Mimi, Malcolm, Jackie, Billy and Tegan. And we have experts by profession, which includes Bernadette, who you've just met. We've got experts with really sort of great knowledge of the courts, of the children's courts, from the Crown Solicitor's Office. We have people from the Children's Court Clinic. We have AQUA represented, so the peak body. We have people with really great trauma expertise as academics, as practitioners, and we also have, we're really pleased to say Professor Judy Atkinson is a member of our expert by profession group. So just the next slide, thanks Betty. So yes, and the role of this large expert reference group is really to provide strategic feedback on the practices that are being trialled in each of the sites during those action cycles, and also feedback on some of the systemic issues that might be emerging across different sectors, across perhaps the courts, the government, changes in law, and other factors that might be impacting on us. So having that sort of discussion at a higher level. The group has decided to form two specific subcommittees to really focus their attention, and these are small groups that will look at trauma and the impact of trauma on family time, and how practitioners, how caseworkers can take a sort of an individualised look at how to build relationships where there has been trauma and to avoid sort of reactivating trauma. The other one is on appropriate and positive working with Aboriginal children and families to build those relationships around family time. The other thing that the group is going to be really key around is that final stage that Amy mentioned around developing good practice resources in the final year of the project. These are going to be shared for free. Amy mentioned we've got that website that's already up and running, and this will be a place where we share in a range of multimedia formats the good practices, and we'll be involving our expert reference group in the development. And this group meets twice a year. Thanks, Betty. So it goes without saying really that one of the critical voices in the space of thinking about family time is the voice of people who are on the receiving end of these practices and who have knowledge based on that and expertise and wisdom based on that. So to borrow from the disability rights community, nothing about us without us. So we are really committed to amplifying those voices, not just through, as Amy mentioned, the interviews we will be doing with family members, children, young people, carers and birth relatives, but also at that strategic level within the project. And we have employed 6 people, as I mentioned their names earlier, as casual research assistants to provide us with that unique understanding of how casework practices affect children and their families, including and in particular perhaps Aboriginal families. So this is really important, and we're really grateful to these people that have come on board. The 6 casual research assistants are experts by experience, but we recognise that asking them to be part of this project is involves them having access to some support around being in a research role. And so each one has been matched to a mentor from the research team to sort of identify their own personal goals. And these might be around systemic issues or around gaining some skills in research or other personal development goals. The plan for the group, the Experts by Experience group, is they've identified that communication is a real problem, and that a lot of the communication information available on DCJ's website sort of speaks about people separately and what people's responsibilities are and obligations and rights. So, our Expert by Experience group believe that they can actually contribute something to this, where the focus is on, as Bernadette said, thinking about relationships and relationship building between people. And so we're in the process of developing a resource and a guide to communication that will have a range of audiences, and that will be shared on our website. They'll also be key contributors to data analysis. In particular, we'll be checking themes that are emerging from the data with caseworkers, but also families. And they'll contribute to the broader group and to the subcommittee's work. And finally, they'll also be really key informants and experts in the development of these multimedia resources, because we want them to be useful to people, not just to caseworkers, but to families. So we need to have that check-in with those key experts. So I'm delighted to introduce my colleague and our colleague, Bobby Hendry, who is one of our experts. Hi, Bobby. Did you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, well, I'm Bobby. I have recently joined the panel, and my experience is that I grew up in care. So I was placed in care when I was 7, and then was put in long-term care at 9. And I experienced, I guess, all the different types of visitation with my family, you know, supervised, unsupervised, rather flexible, you know, getting driven by, you know, the keeping connected people. So yeah, it's been really cool, yeah, hearing other experiences from, you know, like caseworkers and people who are foster carers themselves in this group, and see how we all have, you know, similar experiences and then the different ones, and how, yeah, they can all come together to help.
So we've just got a couple of questions for you, Bobby, and there may well be questions from the audience too. But so can you tell us what caseworkers did to help you connect with your family when you were a child, a young person?
So there are probably a few things. Because my parents both lived kind of far away, I would get driven by caseworker to visit them. And a lot of the time, the things that really helped, I do remember 2 caseworkers particularly, they developed a really good relationship with my mum. And you know, me and my brothers, so that we felt really comfortable, you know, driving in a car, and, you know, like even the 5 minutes, you know, standing at the door, you know, like catching up with my mum. I think that really helped, because it put everyone at ease a bit, and then made it not feel like this really strict thing where, you know, you've got a time to visit and it's all, you know, this sort of thing. It was almost like, you know, like a neighbour dropping the kids back home. And also because there was that, you know, relationship that wasn't awkward, we felt fine, you know, on the drive home, you know, talking about, you know, what we got up to or what we felt. And I remember as a kid always, I don't know, just this, I always had this kind of sad feeling as I left, you know, visiting my mum and my dad, you know, because, you know, I missed them. And I, even as a kid, you know, like still didn't really understand why I couldn't live with them fully. So having someone there who was able to, yeah, like who I was able to talk to and communicate a little bit of what I was feeling, and also help me understand what I was feeling, was really helpful.
Yeah, that's a great point. The transport to and from is really important time. Is there something you wish that they'd done differently?
It's not super particularly, because it's hard to know what they could have done that was differently that would have been more successful, because I guess I haven't really experienced that. But I think certain caseworkers weren't as weren't as easy to talk to. So I think really it's just, you know, those particular ones who I found like I was really comfortable around, that, yeah, if, you know, more of them had been a bit like that, it would have been better. And, you know, some didn't try super hard to get along with my, you know, parents or my carer, and I think that kind of always showed a bit, and, you know, made it a little bit trickier. So I think, yeah, like kind of if they were more like that, that would probably be what I'd recommend people do differently.
Yeah. And do you have any final messages for caseworkers about how they can involve children in decisions more around family time?
Yeah, I remember as a kid, there were times when like I just didn't want to talk on the phone to my mum or my dad, or I just didn't want to see them, or, you know, like there were things on like school camps that all my friends were going to that I couldn't go on because I had to go visit my, you know, my parents. And I think that thing that was said before about, you know, the focus on the kid, not kind of obligations and rights, like I felt really strongly that there was this huge like obligation, not that I had to see my parents, but like that my parents had access to me. And sometimes that really like threw things, like it meant I missed out on a lot, or that I had to, you know, have a conversation with my parents that I didn't want to. So I think, yeah, having kids involved in that can be helpful. I know it can make it tricky because, yeah, like, you know, there's so many pieces of the puzzle that you've got to combine, and you've got to keep so many people happy. So that, you know, like I think listening to the kid a bit could be really helpful, and listen to why they don't want to, you know, talk to their parents, because all kids, you know, even the ones who don't live with their parents, have problems with their parents. So yeah, like I think that was a big one. But also too, I'd probably recommend involving, I guess, the carers and everyone kind of more, because like I just know that my carers, when they were feeling frustrated about, oh, well, we have to call your dad now and this is inconvenient to me, or this has to happen, like when they were feeling like they weren't being heard or being involved in decisions, you know, the kids feel that too. They feel that discomfort and, you know, that classic, you know, like I guess burdenness, and, you know, like, oh, this is all an obligation. So I think you know, if there is like some sort of key involvement with everyone, and, you know, the kids get to, you know, I guess explain what they're thinking and feeling, and not exactly make the decisions, but help lead them a bit, can be helpful. So yeah, like I guess listening to kids when they, you know, are feeling uncomfortable about going on a visit or talking to their parents, and also, yeah, like just keeping in mind how the carers are feeling with all that stuff, because I know it can get a bit messy and tricky.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fantastic. And what a great note to end on, and really, yeah, great in terms of the relationships across lots of different people needing to be worked on and improved. So thank you, Bobby. And now I'd like to hand over to my colleague, Sarah.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah. I'm a research associate here at the Research Centre for Children and Families. And I can finally say that I actually am here at the Research Centre for Children and Families. I'm on campus today for the first time in a really long time. And I just want to talk to you about three things essentially today. I'll talk you through the practice trials, so what each of our 4 local action teams are trialling, how they're gathering the evidence for the research project, and just some, like a really brief snapshot of some of the key learnings so far. We probably don't have time to go into all of the rich, wonderful findings we've collected so far, so I'm just going to focus on sort of more those key reflective learnings that we've learnt so far. So in terms of the practice trials, our 4 teams have come together. They've discussed what they want to get out of this project in the first action cycle, and they've chosen a practice to trial locally in their teams. So the Newcastle and Maitland and Dubbo teams are trialling doing family time from a distance. And actually, when these teams were choosing what practices they should trial in the first action cycle, it was sort of the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. So this seemed like a really obvious choice. It was something that they were going to have to be doing anyway. So it was great that this project allowed an opportunity essentially for us to gather some evidence about, something that is being implemented really widely. And also our other 2 teams, the Sydney team and Wollongong teams, are trialling debriefing practices. So with the Sydney team, it's about doing a post-visit debrief with children, carers and parents. And that's also something that's been really doable to do in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, because it's about having really supportive phone calls and collecting feedback essentially from children, carers and parents, and that can easily be done over the phone during this time. And our Wollongong team have been looking at a pre and post visit debrief with parents to promote participation in family time, identify any barriers to participation, assess what worked well, and identify areas for improvement. And that practice is really about building that relationship, as Bobby mentioned, between birth relatives and the caseworker, strengthening that relationship. And so we've been, next slide. We've been gathering evidence on a monthly basis. Our teams have been coming together by Zoom at the moment, but we're starting to get together again in person. And it's about having some really meaningful reflective time about the practices that they're trialling with children and families. A reflective practice, of course, is a sort of key skill, as Bernadette was mentioning, that social workers, caseworkers, should have in their toolkit. It's important to be constantly reflecting on what we're doing so that we can work in a really sort of positive way, in an ethical way with children and families. So every month our teams are getting together. They're reflecting on what's working well, what's not working so well, what could be improved, any challenges or difficulties they're experiencing with the practice changes, and how they'd like to, refine those practices, improve them for the future. And they also reflect about how they think those practices are impacting relationships between children and their permanent families and birth families. So these meetings are a space where action researchers are engaging in some really nice critical and collaborative reflection. It's about being able to be supported by their peers as they're going through this journey of the practice trials, and sharing tips. And our emphasis on reflective practice, I think, is a real strength of the project. It's a core concept in social work, as we've mentioned. So critically analyse your worldview is really important, and we want that to be sort of prioritised within this study. And it really adds to the richness of what we are learning. So if we just advance to the next slide. So what we've learned so far about doing family time from a distance, and we're just going to focus on this practice because I think it's a really timely one and something that everyone would like to know more about in the current context. So we've learned a lot about the types of support caseworkers need to support families. So for example, early on in the practice trial, our action researchers told us about some of the difficulties they were experiencing with sustaining conversations with children using distant methods of communication. And that was really understandable for a lot of our families. It was, the first time they were having virtual visits with their kids. It was the first time kids were getting on FaceTime and using these different forms of communication. So in response to that, we were able to create a series of resources that Amy's already mentioned, and offer up tips about how we can support families to engage in those meaningful interactions using video chats or conversation starters. And those can be found on our project website. So I encourage you to look those up and share them with your families. So some of the feedback we've gotten is that that's really supported, children and families to have better, more meaningful interactions using family time from a distance. And caseworkers have also been supporting families in their own ways. Some of that support has been really practical, and they've needed support from their organisations to be able to sort of deliver that support. So things like giving access to iPads, giving access to mobile phones and phone credits. It might be working with families around troubleshooting and how to create an email address, working with carers around some of the issues with privacy and what apps are safe. And then it's also included support that's sort of more emotional and in line with sort of coaching, providing that emotional support around, you know, what to expect when you're having a video call with a child, and that it's okay that if the child loses a little bit of interest or gets distracted, and talking through some of the strategies that you can use to support those interactions. We've also learnt about how distant family time can support flexibility in contact arrangements. And I think this really speaks nicely to what Bobby was saying earlier about, you know, there are so many competing demands for kids, and especially as they grow, you know, it might be the case that as they grow up into teenagers, for example, they want to spend a lot more time with their friends, and they might be, you know, really overwhelmed with having to go every couple of weekends for a visit. It might be some distance away. So this provides a nice tool to be able to work flexibly with the needs of the children as they grow and change over time. And I think it's also allowed caseworkers to reflect on how contact arrangements can be a little bit rigid. Often they're stipulated in contact plans. So, sorry, I've just lost my place. So it's about, you know, how we can assist to create flexibility for children in those ways, but also perhaps how we can facilitate more regular contact. And that's something that our caseworkers have reported, that by implementing family time from a distance, some families have been able to sort of increase their communication and contact, which is really lovely to see. So another sort of strength we've seen is that children are sort of more able to take control of that interaction. So that might be through showing family members their bedrooms or the things that they like for the first time, which is really exciting. Distant family time can also be used as a way of maintaining connections in between visits. So caseworkers have reflected about how they'd like to review existing contact arrangements to incorporate phone calls or video calls in between those scheduled face-to-face visits, so that they can keep that momentum going in relationships between kids and their families. We know that often by having those scheduled face-to-face visits, and you know, they might be monthly, they might be a few times a year, you can lose momentum in that relationship, and it can be a little bit awkward at first when you see each other in person. So in implementing family time from a distance, caseworkers have really seen a strength from this practice as being able to sort of maintain those connections, and yeah, keeping that relationship alive even when we're not in person, face to face. Caseworkers have also observed some great successes and breakthroughs in relationships between children and their parents and family members. So where they are having meaningful conversations, opening up to one another and learning about each other. And they've reflected about how more work needs to be done to ensure that that's prioritised as well during in-person visits. So where the focus might be more on doing a fun activity, our caseworkers have seen how using video chats, the emphasis is much more on having a meaningful conversation. So it's about how we can bring that practice now into our regular business as usual face-to-face family time visits. And we've also learnt about how distant communication can be used to ease children and carers into a relationship where that connection might have been fragmented in the past, where the child has not seen their parent, for example, in a number of years. And Blythe will provide a wonderful example about this in a second. And also where carers and birth parents, where family members have not had a relationship to begin with. So it can be a really nice way of building that relationship where, you know, we see these parties having to work together to support the child to have these interactions. So now I'll hand over to Blythe Quick, who is one of our wonderful action researchers, and she's just going to provide a case example from her trialling of this practice of doing family time from a distance. So would you like to come on, Blythe?
Oh, hi everyone. As Sarah mentioned, my name's Blythe and I'm a casework coordinator with Catholic Care Social Services Hunter Manning in the Newcastle region. So as Sarah mentioned, I've been working in the research project to really explore and uncover, measures that support holistic and meaningful connections for children and their families. So, doing that has really provided an opportunity to contribute to, I guess, evidence-based practice, but also trialing that in my current workplace and casework. So being a part of the research team that is focusing on family time at a distance, we've been able to explore how family time at a distance can be used as a relationship building tool. As mentioned, family time at a distance has become very prevalent during COVID-19, where a lot of visits for families face-to-face haven't been able to occur. So using different measures of family time at a distance to not necessarily replace that visit, but to keep those children very well connected to their family during such a difficult time. So examples of how this has looked has been things like video calls, phone calls, sharing of letters, photos and videos, and also connecting families with the carers via email, correspondence, SMS, things like that, to provide updates ongoingly. So I think what's been great is to use the COVID-19 circumstance as an opportunity to really trial the family time at distance and get it started. But I think it's also something that we can be using holistically in casework, as mentioned, to keep children connected in between those family face-to-face visits. And I guess I'd like to also share an example of how family time at a distance can be used as a relationship tool to reconnect children. So I guess the example that I'm going to give you is I'm currently working with a 7-year-old boy. He entered care at birth, and he has an array of complex needs and disabilities such as cerebral palsy, global developmental delay, chronic lung disease, hydrocephalus, and things like speech and sight issues. So this young boy hasn't had family time with his dad since he was a baby. So dad lives interstate and has historically displayed quite an absence in the child's life and with the agency engagement. However, in the last 6 to 12 months, dad has been able to identify through connection with the agency that he would like to reconnect with his son, which is an amazing step in the right direction. So the team kind of sat back and thought, where to from here? And due to the prolonged time since dad has had a connection with his son and, in consideration of the child's needs, I spent some time, working with dad and encouraging and empowering him to share some photos with us that we could then provide the child. So dad engaged in this and provided us with some photos that we sent to the carer to give to the child. And this really allowed the child to have a visual of dad, and the carer using these photos to refer to dad when introducing discussions and narratives around dad to the child. And then whilst the sharing of photos was in the process, dad also re-engaged in email correspondence with the carer where they were sharing updates and photos and videos. So I guess by following such a structured process, it actually allowed dad the opportunity to evidence his commitment to family time and the connection with his son, but as well it therapeutically supported the child to familiarise with dad prior to having that face-to-face interaction after such a significant amount of time. So during COVID-19, the carer and dad organised a video call with agency approval. And prior to this, I spent some time with dad to prepare and work together with him to develop some strategies on how to engage with the child during the video call. And Sarah's, handouts and information sheets were really, really helpful in, giving him some ideas on what he could do with the child, but also, around his language and things like that. So dad was very receptive to this and was able to come up with some great strategies on how to engage with the child. And one of them was, if the child seemed to become quite distracted or disengaged, how to positively end family time on a meaningful note so that the next time could be really, that could continue and be really positive. So the call occurred and it actually exceeded our expectations with some really positive strengths identified by both carer and dad post the video call. You know, these included things like the child identified him straight away, and was calling him dad, actively engaging in the video call by showing, you know, toys and some of the things that he really enjoyed within his home environment. So showing him his bedroom. And then also too, you know, when the child was coming in and out of play, dad taking that opportunity to engage with the carer and rebuild that connection as well. So at conclusion of the visit, the child actually displayed minimal emotional regulation difficulties, and actually the following morning was, you know, requesting to call dad again. So that was an amazing outcome that we got to see from that progression of family time. And, you know, now that family time arrangement from a distance has now been organised and scheduled on a regular basis with the agency, working with dad to hopefully in the near future support him to attend to the local area for a face-to-face visit, which hasn't happened for a very long time. So I guess from a permanency perspective as well for this child, with the new permanency support program focusing on, you know, finding those permanent pathways for children, we're currently exploring an open adoption pathway for this young person. And this is something that dad is really, really supportive of. And that family time connection and the carer's capacity to support that family time has really assisted in building quite a strong foundation for not just successful permanency outcomes, but those lifelong connections, even when the agency is no longer involved, and, you know, forever for that young child. So I guess this case is really, you know, is a really positive example of how using distance communication, can assist with reconnecting children, you know, with their families quite successfully. And it shows how, you know, it can unite carers and families to work together to support children to remain connected to their families, no matter the outcome from a permanency perspective or the location, or, you know, it's, I guess technology has really provided that an amazing opportunity there for children and their families. So I guess upon reflection throughout my time participating in the project, I think one thing that's specifically resonated with me quite significantly is that in the permanency support casework space, you can become so entrenched in crisis management. However, I think this project has really provided the opportunity for me to take some time away from that and adopt a more proactive and evidence-based approach in order to really foster those connections and put in place some specific and therapeutic tailored measures that achieve those positive and meaningful outcomes for children. So I guess that's a bit of a summary on where we're up to from an action research point of view, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how this continues throughout the rest of the program. So, yeah.
Thank you so much to Blythe and to all our presenters. That was really excellent. And your words were a really nice way to kind of wrap up what we're talking about, which ultimately comes back to, as you said, that child's experience of being able to reconnect with his father after having that relationship separated for a period of time. So we're running short of time. We do have one question that I'd like to put towards Bernadette. So there's two questions that can be kind of combined to basically ask the question that, you know, this, Bernadette earlier highlighted the training that's being offered to new caseworkers, but what about caseworkers, the existing caseworkers who may have a older way of thinking about identity contact and practices that may not have been updated recently? So what happens with those caseworkers, Bernadette? I'll pass to you.
As much as I'd like to say we've got a perfect workforce, we don't. We have a mixed bag from a whole different range of reasons. We rarely run statewide training, as in a course that everybody has to do, partly because there's, you know, I feel ridiculous every time I say it, but, you know, there's 2,500 caseworkers across 80 sites. And so the idea of rolling out training is there are a few logistics involved. It becomes a big exercise, and by the time you get to one end of the state, you've got to start all over again. What we do have, though, is a few different resources. So we have an internal site that you guys won't have seen, which is called our casework practice site. And on it is all the casework advice, and all the casework advice is absolutely up to date with the most, with our practice framework and with our CDP, and everybody has access to that. We have the positions of casework specialists, which are the teams that I manage, which are in the OSP. who consult on matters across the state. So when I say that every caseworker goes to group supervision, every group supervision, most group supervision, I won't say every because nothing's ever every, is it? Most group supervisions have a casework specialist in them. And that casework specialist needs to prepare for those sessions. So whilst the caseworkers aren't preparing, the casework specialist is. And so if she knew that they were going to a session that was about family time, and you know, we've got lots of complaints about family time from this family, they think we're being unfair, we need to review it, she would take in the tools, the up-to-date information and share in that action learning type environment. And to give you an example of numbers again, in the last month, whatever that was, July, in the month of July, casework specialists attended 652 separate group supervision sessions, which means that 652 families had some input from that. Everybody in that group had a chance to learn the most current up-to-date information about whatever they were talking about. Additionally, and finally, I know we're out of time, all the material for the new caseworker training program, because this is first time through, it's not up yet. Once they've run it through twice, it will in fact be up on our casework practice site, so that when people are working with staff and caseworkers, if we think we come across something that we think they might need a bit of refreshing in, they can in fact go to the current casework development program site and do that module, because they're all built-in modules. So all of that's not there yet, but it will be in a couple of months. So we have an expectation that everybody's practicing within the framework. We have lots of ways to keep people up to date, but not a training per se. However, everybody learns at different paces, and some staff are fully on board and are working the best ways possible with families, and others every now and then do slip back into the old practices and need a little bit of assistance.
Thank you very much to all of our panelists. I just want to thank Bernadette Wood, for the Director of Practice and Permanency in the Office of the Senior Practitioner in Department of Communities and Justice. Dr. Susan Collings, who's a Research Fellow in the Research Center for Children and Families. Bobby Hendry, who's our expert by experience with the Research Center. Sarah Chifty, who's a Research Associate with our Research Center, and Blythe Quick, who's a caseworker at Catholic Care Hunter Manning. You can go to our website, as we've said. If you go under resources and publications, you'll find the resources that we've been sharing. We also have a dedicated project website where you can find more information. So just go to the Research Center for Children and Families, scroll down, and you'll find under resources and publications that information. Thank you again for joining us and taking time out of your busy day. Here's an image of where you can go and find that material. You can also join our mailing list for the Research Center for Children and Families. So, and those are some of the tip sheets that we've highlighted and research to practice notes that we've talked about. Thank you again. We're really pleased to have had a great turnout. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact myself, or there's also the General Research Center website. Thank you so much. All the best, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.